JonBenet Ramsey was only 6 years old when her life ended in a way too cruel for words. What should have been a peaceful Christmas night in Boulder, Colorado, turned into one of the darkest mysteries in American history. Her family, once admired for their wealth and social standing, became trapped under an unforgiving spotlight, accused, judged, and forever broken. And now, after decades of silence, Burke Ramsay, the quiet older brother who carried the weight of suspicion since childhood, has finally spoken out. His words are not just confessions of memory, but fragments of pain that leave the world shaken all over again. The night everything changed. On December 25, 1996, the Ramsey family celebrated Christmas in their Boulder home. It was supposed to be a day filled with joy, family, and presents. But by the following morning, everything had changed. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet's mother, dialed 911 to report her daughter missing. Alongside her call for help was a handwritten ransom note demanding a very specific sum of money, $118,000, the same amount as John Ramsey's recent work bonus. Police arrived quickly, but mistakes in how the scene was handled would cast a shadow over the case for decades. Hours later, John Ramsey searched the house and discovered his daughter in the basement. What he found turned their world upside down. The young girl had suffered severe injuries, and investigators would later confirm that her death was a homicide. Evidence also pointed to the presence of an unknown male, leaving more questions than answers. In a single day, the Ramsey family went from celebrating the holidays to being at the center of one of the most infamous mysteries in American history. The tragedy not only devastated them personally, but also placed them under relentless suspicion. From that moment forward, investigators and the public would be divided. Was this the act of an intruder, or did the explanation lie within the walls of the Ramsey home? The media storm and the family under suspicion. From the very beginning, the case drew massive attention. JonBenet was not just another missing child. She was already known in Boulder for her beauty pageant appearances. Just a week before her death, she had been seen smiling in a Christmas parade, wearing her crown and sash. To her father, John, this public exposure would later feel like a mistake, because when tragedy struck, the media turned her young life into a spectacle. Headlines spread across the nation, plastering photos of JonBenet in makeup and glamorous dresses. What should have been the private grief of a family was turned into a public obsession. The ransom note found in the house fueled even more suspicion. Investigators questioned how anyone could have calmly written such a long and detailed note inside the home without being noticed. The handwriting, the paper, and the odd ransom amount all made the spotlight swing toward Patsy Ramsey. The Ramseys gave televised interviews, insisting on their innocence, but refusing to be questioned by police outside of their own terms. To the public, this looked suspicious. Instead of sympathy, the family faced accusation after accusation. Reporters painted John as a businessman with too much to hide, Patsy as a controlling pageant mother, and Burke as the silent figure in the shadows. Rumors spread that the parents had staged the scene to cover up an accident, or worse, that Burke himself had harmed his sister in a fit of childish anger. The pressure grew worse when tabloids ran with theories without evidence. Every smile, every gesture from the Ramseys was scrutinized. Even footage of Burke, a 9-year-old boy at the time, was dissected. People wondered why he hadn't come out of his room during the chaos. They asked why he looked nervous or smiled awkwardly in interviews years later. The whispers were cruel. Some insisted that the killer had been living under the same roof as JonBenet. The Boulder police, criticized for mishandling the crime scene, focused heavily on the family. Their tunnel vision left other possible suspects overlooked, and as months turned into years, the Ramseys' reputation crumbled. Instead of being treated as grieving parents, they were treated as suspects in the court of public opinion. Yet the accusations were built on shaky ground. In 1999, a grand jury even considered charges against John and Patsy, but the district attorney refused to proceed, citing insufficient evidence. The shadow of suspicion, however, never went away. Patsy carried that burden until her death in 2006 from ovarian cancer, leaving behind a husband still fighting to clear their names, and a son forced to grow up in silence under the weight of one of America's darkest mysteries. Burke Ramsay breaks his silence. For nearly 20 years after his sister's death, Burke Ramsay remained silent. He never spoke publicly, never gave interviews, and lived in the shadow of suspicion that the media never allowed to fade. While his father fought publicly for justice and his mother battled cancer until her passing in 2006, Burke tried to build a life out of the spotlight. Yet his name remained tied to whispers and accusations he had no way of escaping. In 2016, 2 decades after JonBenet's murder, Burke finally agreed to speak in a rare interview with Dr. Phil. Now a grown man in his late 20s, he explained why he had chosen to remain quiet for so long. "I want to honor her memory by doing this interview," he said. "I don't want anyone to forget." His words revealed not only loyalty to his sister, but also the weight of carrying unspoken grief. On the show, Burke addressed the relentless speculation that had haunted him since childhood. He said it was difficult to understand how people could believe he was involved. "It blows my mind," he told Dr. Phil. "You won't find any evidence because that's not what happened." His voice cracked as he recalled moments from that time, including the surreal memory of attending his sister's funeral and staring at her small casket. As a 9-year-old, he struggled to understand what death even meant, and he admitted that it was only when he saw his father cry that the full weight of the loss sank in. Burke also shared his own thoughts about who might have been responsible. He believed it was probably some pedophile in the pageant audience, someone who had seen JonBenet on stage and decided to take advantage of her innocence. This theory echoed what many investigators outside the Boulder police had long suspected, that an intruder, not a family member, had committed the crime. But even as Burke spoke, critics seized on his demeanor. Some noted that he smiled at odd moments during the interview. To psychologists, this was a common nervous response, a way of masking discomfort, not joy. Yet to those already convinced of his guilt, the smiles became evidence against him. Burke's attempt to honor his sister's memory only pulled him back into the same cruel cycle of judgment he had faced as a child. Still, for the first time in 20 years, the world heard his side of the story, and while his words did not solve the mystery, they reminded people that JonBenet's brother was not just a name on a list of suspects. He was a boy who lost his sister in the most traumatic way imaginable, and a man still struggling to escape the shadow of that loss. The fight for justice and the role of DNA evidence. While Burke's words reopened painful memories, his father, John Ramsay, had never stopped fighting for answers. In the years after Patsy's death in 2006, John carried the weight of both a grieving parent and a man determined to prove his family's innocence. He repeatedly criticized the Boulder Police Department for failing to properly investigate the crime. From the moment JonBenet's body was discovered, he believed investigators had been blinded by their assumption that the family was involved. That tunnel vision, John argued, allowed the true killer to escape justice. In 2008, there was finally a turning point. New DNA testing showed that an unidentified male's genetic material was present on JonBenet's clothing. This was not a partial trace, but a consistent match across multiple items, making it clear that someone outside the Ramsay family had handled the clothing at the time of the crime. Then District Attorney Mary Lacey issued a formal letter to John, declaring the entire Ramsay family cleared of suspicion. The match of male DNA on 2 separate items of clothing worn by the victim at the time of the murder makes it clear to us that an unknown male handled these items, she wrote. For the Ramsays, it was the closest thing to vindication they had ever received. Yet even with that scientific breakthrough, no arrest was made. The Boulder police took back control of the case in 2009, but years of mistrust and failed leads had already damaged the investigation. Critics accused them of protecting their reputation rather than pursuing new avenues. For John, this refusal to embrace modern forensic tools felt like a betrayal. He knew technology was advancing rapidly, and he pushed for all remaining samples to be re-examined by independent labs using genetic genealogy. The success of cases like the capture of the Golden State Killer in 2018 showed what was possible. If a predator who had eluded justice for over 40 years could be identified through DNA and family trees, why couldn't the same be done for JonBenet? Experts like C.C. Moore and Dr. Ellen Graytack agreed that the technology had the potential to uncover answers that were previously impossible. They emphasized that today's forensic work examines millions of markers rather than the small handful once used, dramatically increasing the chances of finding a match. For John Ramsey, the urgency was not about revenge, but about closure. He spoke openly about wanting justice for his daughter, not only to bring peace to his own family, but to ensure that whoever committed this crime could never harm another child. He carried not just sorrow but determination, reminding the world that JonBenet's case was not cold because of a lack of evidence, but because of a lack of will. Burke's life after the storm and the legal battles. As his father continued pressing for DNA testing, Burke Ramsay tried to build a life far away from cameras and headlines. After graduating from Purdue University in Indiana in 2010 with a degree in computer and information technology, he chose to work quietly as a software engineer. By his late 30s, he was living in Michigan, keeping his personal life as private as possible. Those who knew him said he avoided any discussion about the case. A family member even revealed, "Burke doesn't talk about the case. Ever. If he sees a show about it, he changes the channel. He's not the least bit interested in watching any of the documentaries." For him, the subject was not just painful, it was a wound he refused to reopen. But even as he avoided the spotlight, the world kept pulling him back in. In 2016, the same year as his Dr. Phil interview, CBS released a 6-part docuseries called The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. The program went further than speculation. It suggested that Burke had accidentally killed his sister after a fight over food, and that his parents had staged the crime scene to protect him. For Burke, this was not only false, but devastating. The series reignited old accusations he had spent his entire life trying to escape. Burke fought back in the only way he could, through the courts. He filed a defamation lawsuit against CBS, demanding $250 million in compensatory damages and $500 million in punitive damages. The case drew headlines across the nation, a reminder that JonBenet's name still had the power to dominate the media decades later. After 3 years of legal battle, the lawsuit was settled in 2019. The exact terms remain confidential, but the settlement signaled that the accusations had crossed a line. For Burke, it was a chance to reclaim some measure of dignity after being painted as a suspect yet again. Despite the settlement, the scars left by years of suspicion cannot be erased. From the moment he was 9 years old, Burke was treated as if he might be guilty of his sister's murder. He grew up seeing his face on tabloids, reading cruel speculation, and even watching strangers dissect his childhood behavior. That kind of judgment never truly disappears. Even now, when he avoids the topic entirely, the association remains. His career may be steady, his life quiet, but his name will forever be tied to a case he insists he had no part in. For Burke, the silence is not weakness, it is survival. But in breaking that silence, even briefly, he reminded the world that he was more than a suspect. He was a brother who lost his sister, a child who endured unimaginable trauma, and an adult still haunted by the questions that no one has been able to answer. the present state of the case, and the unanswered questions. Nearly 3 decades have passed since that terrible morning in Boulder, yet JonBenet Ramsey's case remains officially unsolved. The Boulder Police Department still lists it as an open investigation, with annual updates posted to the public. Over the years, hundreds of pieces of evidence have been collected and thousands of tips reviewed. But without modern DNA testing on the samples still locked away in evidence storage, the truth remains just out of reach. John Ramsey has continued to speak out, demanding that the remaining DNA be sent to independent experts who specialize in genetic genealogy. He believes this is the only path left to finding the person responsible. He has even appealed to the governor of Colorado to intervene, arguing that the police are more concerned with protecting their reputation than solving the case. For John, the refusal to release the DNA is devastating. He says it feels like the system would rather let the mystery remain unsolved than admit past mistakes. The work of retired Detective Lou Smith, who passed away in 2010, still influences the search for answers. Smith believed the intruder theory was the most logical explanation, and before his death he left behind a list of potential suspects. His daughter Cindy has continued his work, collecting DNA samples from individuals her father believed should have been investigated more closely. If authorities were to allow new testing, those samples could finally provide the missing link. For Burke, the case remains both deeply personal and impossibly heavy. Since his 2016 interview, he has avoided the public eye, choosing silence once again. He has no desire to watch documentaries or read reports that recycle accusations. To him, every mention of his sister's name in the media reopens a wound he has spent years trying to close. And yet, whether he wants it or not, the shadow of JonBenet's death will always follow him. The tragedy of JonBenet Ramsey endures because it represents more than just a single crime. It is a story of a little girl whose life was cut short, a family destroyed by both grief and suspicion, and a justice system that failed to deliver clarity. Every year that passes without an answer feels like another betrayal, not just to the Ramseys, but to everyone who still believes that justice for a child should never be delayed. JonBenet's case has haunted the world for nearly 30 years, and her brother's long-awaited words have added a new layer of heartbreak to the story. But the truth still remains hidden. Do you think advances in DNA technology will finally reveal who was responsible for her death? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this.